I would like to say that I have um, three layers of references. My first layer is in terms of actual visual storytelling and pacing. That would be Frank Miller, Walt Simonson, John Byrne. When I got into college, oh wait, now one of the biggest art influences that I have, which leads to my next level of kind of creative, interesting growth, was Bill Sienkiewicz. Now, there's a reason why my work doesn't. I don't think it really shows much of Bill Sienkiewicz's influence, but I was beyond Byrne and Simonson. I have pretty broad tastes. Some people only like one type of artist, or some people only like manga. I liked realistic artists. I like cartoony artists. I wasn't reading Jeff Smith's Bone at the time, but he's another artist that I like. I have pretty wide a variety of tastes in terms of like from cartoony to realistic. Like I do remember reading Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek's Marvels series, and also Alex Ross and Mark Waid's Kingdom Come, which came out a few years later, which is very very realistic in terms of their artistic style. One of the things I loved about Bill Sienkiewicz was that he showed me I didn't necessarily have to choose a style. He could do on a single comic book page. He could do something that was very painterly. And he could do just something that's almost graphic and cartoony, like a Ralph Steadman. Then he could do something that I also saw, just 'cause I don't want you to think I'm falling asleep on. I see Mighty Geek mentioning Jim Steranko. He could do something that's Steranko-esque. And he could do this not from page to page. We could have this from panel to panel. Just this beautiful like way he would transition from one style to another. And that led me to artists that had sort of a multimedia taste to it. Sienkiewicz was the first and the most influential in that. But then I grew into being interested in guys like Dave McKeon, who most people I think know him for his covers to the original run of Sandman. But he also did a lot of great sequential comics as well. He has a series that he wrote and drew called Cages, which I think is still one of my all-time favorite comics to date. But that led me down a path in terms of artists that didn't necessarily let themselves be pigeonholed into one particular style or media. That led me to David Mack from Kabuki fame. I really love his work as well. And then eventually I fell into Ashley Wood's work, which Ashley Wood, I love his work, but in a way it's bittersweet to me. I very, very much love his work. I'm very much a fan of his work. The reason why I say that my fandom of his work is bittersweet is because when I was in college, that was when I really became a fan of Ashley Wood. And I was not able to draw well enough to draw like how I wanted. I wasn't able to draw what I saw in my head. I couldn't draw well enough to draw images the way I saw them. But when I discovered Ashley Wood's work, I immediately fell in love with it. But the reason why is because his work is what I saw my artwork growing into. Now that's bittersweet because yes, obviously I'm going to be drawn to somebody who draws the type of work that I want to make. But I was already, after being a fan of comics in like high school, it was definitely frowned upon to ape another artist's style. And that put me in this question of, all right, well, if somebody's already doing what I want to do, then where does that leave me? What do I become if someone else is already doing what I'm doing? How can I be Ashley Wood if Ashley Wood's already Ashley Wood? And that was something that it took me, I don't know, a while. I struggled with that probably for a couple of years. And I think that the way I came out of that was probably around the time that I started taking figure drawing classes regularly. And I realized what Bill Sienkiewicz, David Mack, and Ashley Wood all had in common, which was that they did very expressionistic artwork. But the reason why they could exaggerate and distort and do expressionistic versions, executions of the human figure and form was because they knew how to draw so well that they could go off the reservation, as it were, without they could convince you of something that might be an abstraction or a exaggeration of the human form, but they had enough mastery over it that they could make it convincing to you. And that's when I realized, oh, I just don't know how to draw well enough. That was like a big light bulb moment for me. So then I said, all right, well, I'm taking these figure drawing classes. I'm trying to learn how to draw. Who do I want to look at in terms of learning to draw better? And then my art influences went from comic book guys to illustration educators. And that's when I really got into Andrew Loomis, George Bridgman. I was aware of Walt Reed, although I hadn't really looked at his work as much. But I would say that was the point where I really got into Bridgman and Loomis. And those were my two in terms of art education. Well, there's three, because there's Bridgman, there's Loomis, and there's Karl Gnass, who I continue to study with. And I would say that, you know, I'm leaving out a very important art influence. And I even mentioned this. I have an art book that I published that's available on my Amazon page. And in it, there's a section where I call it the two Karls. Because one is Karl Gnass, who I've been studying with for many years now. And I would say that he taught me how to analyze. And I think that more important than someone just teaching you how to draw a thing is teaching you how to learn to teach yourself. And I would say that was probably the biggest thing I took away from him. Like, he gave me a great love for figure drawing that when I first started taking figure drawing classes, I was looking at it more like it was a necessary, I don't want to say necessary evil, but I wasn't in love with figure drawing when I started taking those classes. I just thought, I want to make better comics. This will help me get there. Now, if I had to stop making comics, I would be heartbroken. But if I was allowed to continue studying the human figure, doing figure drawing, taking figure drawing classes the rest of my life, I would miss comics. But I wouldn't feel like, oh, I don't want to make art anymore. There's enough just in learning to draw the beauty of the human form that's interesting to me that I could spend the rest of my life just studying anatomy and studying gesture and studying the flow and the volumes. There's so much. There's never a point where I feel like I'm going to master it. So that's a huge gift that he gave me. The other Karl is my friend, Karl Altstaetter. He is a comic creator who I worked with. He also works in the toy industry, but I worked with him. I was working on a cartoon series called Alien Racers, and I had done some of the story development for that for the toy line, and it was going to come with a package with a comic book that I wrote, and I drew the first one. And I must tell you, like, I think most comic creators will have like an early work that they did that's out in public that they're like, I am not proud of this. I don't think this is my best work. That Alien Racers comic would probably be that piece. I really don't think it is of a professional quality, but they ran with it. But it became very clear early on in that series that I was not going to be able to continue my toy design duties, my storytelling duties for the cartoon series, and also just do, like, I wasn't going to be able to continue to do this work. We needed somebody who specialized, who drew comics. And so we brought Karl in, we looked at his portfolio, thought his work was great, and we hired him. But it wasn't until we had been working together for a few weeks when I realized he showed me a copy of another book that he had done. And it's a series called Q Unit. I had read Q Unit when I was in high school. They gave away like the Q Unit Zero issue in Hero Magazine for those old school hats who remember Hero Magazine, which was kind of like a competitor to Wizard in the 80s and 90s. Anyway, Karl I remember seeing the Zero issue of that and then saying, oh, I have to get this comic. And I remember getting the first issue that was published by Harris Comics. And then for contractual reasons, there was a whole lot of hoopla and a lot of legal entanglements that kept them from ever publishing the rest of the series. But I remember loving that book and being sad that I never, got to see the rest of it. And so here I am working with a guy who drew a book that I loved. And Karl and I have become very good friends over the years, but he has been an incredible mentor to me. And for somebody who was way more experienced, he never talked down to me as a comic creator. He always treated me as an equal, even though he was far more experienced, far more capable as a draftsman and as a storyteller. And he was encouraging and nurturing at times when I didn't deserve it, because I am stubborn and I'm hard-headed, and there are things that he tried to tell me. Like, he spent probably a good 6 months, if not a year, trying to get me into the habit of flipping my drawings. So for those who don't know, if you have a drawing and you either put it on a light box and you flip it over so that you're looking through the light box at the mirror image of it, or if you flip your drawings, if you're drawing digitally and you're in Photoshop, when you look at the mirror reflection of your drawing, you can see way more of your flaws that you might not see just because we're used to perceiving the world a certain way. And a lot of times you won't see those mistakes because they're just your natural blind spot. But when you look at the mirror image of it, they jump out at you. You can't help but see. And then you're like, oh, wow, I really need to fix that. I didn't realize that it was that bad. Other people can see it, but you can't see it. That's just an example of one of the things that Karl tried to teach me, and I resisted for a very long time. And we joke about it because to this day, it's the one thing that he and my wife have in common. Well, no, they have a lot in common. They're both people who care about me. But I joke about it whenever whenever my wife does it, I will mention Karl, or whenever Karl does it, I'll mention it to my wife, that there's some shit that they were telling me like years ago, you should be doing this, you should be doing that, and I just never listened, because it still happens to this day. But the point is that Karl's a great friend. He was very patient. He has and continues to teach me a lot about comics, art, visual storytelling.